Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're tackling something really fundamental, isn't it? How nature and nurture kind of weave together to shape who you are. We've got some fascinating stuff here. Behavioral genetics lectures, developmental psychology texts, and research on trauma and identity, too.
It's definitely a complex area. And I think, if you're trying to get the main insights without drowning in details, this is the place.
Yeah, exactly.
Our goal is really to unpack the surprising ways genes and your environment, well, they team up, how they influence behavior, development, your well-being. We're hoping for a few aha moments for you.
Okay, let's jump in. So, thinking back, the early attempts, scientists looked at families, right?
Yeah.
Seems logical.
That's where it started, yeah. Family studies make sense if traits run in families. Maybe it's the genes.
But the problem is?
The problem is families share everything, pretty much. Genes, yes, but also the house, the food, the neighborhood, the whole environment.
So you can't tell what's causing what?
Exactly. It's really tough to disentangle the genetic threads from the environmental ones. They're all mixed up.
Right. So that led to needing, cleverer methods, twin studies, and adoption studies.
Precisely. Twin studies were a really smart approach. You compare identical twins, monozygotic, 100% shared genes, with fraternal twins, dizygotic, sharing about 50% of their genes, like regular siblings.
And the idea is, if the environment's the same.
If you assume the environment is pretty much identical for both types of twins, then if identical twins are more similar for a certain trait, it suggests, well, a stronger genetic influence.
But there are catches there too, right? Like fraternal twins can be boy-girl pairs.
Yeah.
Their experiences might be different just because of that.
That's a big one. And even with identical twins, people forget the prenatal environment.
Ah, right, in the womb.
Yeah. Did they share the same placenta monochorionic or have separate ones bichorionic? That can actually make a difference right from the very start, before they're even born.
So that identical environment assumption isn't perfectly solid.
It's a simplification, for sure, which is where adoption studies come in handy.
Okay, how do they help?
Well, you look at kids raised by adoptive parents. They share genes with their biological parents, but their environment comes from their adoptive family.
So you can see if they're more like their biological family, suggesting genes, or their adoptive family, suggesting environment.
That's the basic idea. But again, complexities, like what about the 9 months before adoption? The prenatal environment is still from the biological mother.
True.
And sometimes adoption isn't totally random. Adoptive parents might maybe share some background or traits with biological parents more often than you'd expect by chance.
Wow, yeah. It really is like detective work, tracking all these clues and potential red herrings.
It is. But despite all these challenges, some really powerful findings have come out, especially from studies with hundreds and hundreds of twin pairs.
Okay, so what's the big takeaway from those massive studies?
Pretty consistently, they point towards heritability estimates of around, say, 50% for some major traits.
50%. For what kind of traits?
Things like IQ, introversion, extroversion, how outgoing or shy you are, and even levels of aggression.
So roughly half the reason people differ on those things in a population is down to their genetic differences.
That's what the numbers suggest, yeah. About half the variation we see across people seems linked to genetic variation.
Okay, 50% sounds like a nice, neat number, but I feel like there's a but coming. What complicates that picture?
Well, one thing is that prenatal environment we mentioned. If something significant happens in the womb and you only start measuring after birth, it could look genetic because identical twins shared that womb environment more closely.
Ah, okay. It gets mistaken for a genetic effect.
Potentially. And another assumption is, that boys and girls are raised exactly the same way. If parenting differs systematically based on gender, that's an environmental difference that could skew the heritability numbers a bit.
That makes sense. And it's really, really important to stress heritability isn't destiny for one person, right? It's about population differences.
Oh, absolutely crucial point. Think about the number of fingers people have.
Okay. Usually 5 per hand.
Right. Genes clearly determine that 5 is the human standard. But if you look at the variation in finger number, or why some people have fewer, it's almost always due to environmental things, like accidents.
So even though genes are key for having fingers at all?
The heritability of finger number is basically 0%. Because the differences we see aren't caused by genetic differences, they're environmental.
Got it. Heritability is about the differences in a group, not the trait itself in one person.
Spot on. It tells you about the proportion of variation linked to genes within a specific group at a specific time.
And that leads us to the really cool part, I think. It's not just nature or nurture.
It's nature and nurture, constantly interacting. Gene-environment interaction.
Meaning the effect of a gene depends on the environment.
Yep. And the effect of the environment can depend on your genes. It goes both ways. Like, there are gene versions related to how we process carbohydrates. Their link to something like IQ might only show up as someone eats a diet really high in carbs. Change the diet, and that gene's effect on IQ might disappear or change.
So the gene needs the right environment to even matter in that way.
Exactly. It's this it depends relationship that's absolutely central.
Now, something that always blows my mind a bit.
Yeah.
We think 50-50 genes from mom and dad, but it's not quite that simple, is it? Mitochondrial DNA.
That's a fantastic point. Most of our DNA is in the nucleus, yeah, roughly 50-50 split. But the mitochondria, the little power plants in our cells, they have their own DNA.
And that comes
Exclusively from the mother through the egg cell. So your mitochondrial DNA is 100% maternal lineage.
wild. Okay, and then there's this other idea, almost sounds like Lamarck, that things parents experience could affect their kids' gene expression, not changing the DNA sequence, but how it's used.
Yeah, this is a really active area of research, sometimes called epigenetic inheritance. The best evidence in humans seems to be around things like environmental toxins.
How so?
Exposure to certain toxins might cause changes in how genes are marked or packaged in, say, egg cells. These aren't mutations, but they affect whether a gene is turned on or off, and that change can sometimes be passed down.
So the environment leaves a mark that gets inherited, in a way.
In a sense, yes, affecting gene expression rather than the code itself.
And we see the power of the post-birth environment so clearly in animal studies, like that rat pup research. Darlene Francis.
Oh, her work is classic,
Yeah.
absolutely foundational. She looked at mother rats. Some are naturally high lickers and groomers of their pups, others less so.
Okay.
And she did cross-fostering. She swapped pups at birth. So pups born to low-licking mothers were raised by high-licking mothers and vice versa.
And what happened?
The key finding was that the pups' stress response systems as adults were shaped by the mother who raised them, not the one who gave birth to them.
Wow. So the nurturing style literally changed their biology.
It really did. Pups raised by the high-licking, grooming mothers grew up to be less anxious, better able to handle stress, regardless of their biological mom's behavior. It showed the power of that early postnatal environment.
And didn't that affect carryover generations?
Yes. That was another fascinating part. The female pups who received high levels of licking and grooming grew up to be high lickers and groomers themselves when they had pups.
So it's not just genes, it's like a behavioral and possibly epigenetic inheritance pattern being passed down through maternal care.
Exactly. It suggests early experiences can set up these neurological and behavioral patterns that persist, adding yet another layer to this whole nature-nurture dance.
Okay, let's pivot a bit now and think about how this plays out across the human lifespan, using maybe Erik Erikson's stages as a guide. He starts right at the beginning, infancy, with trust versus mistrust.
Right, that first year, year and a half, it's all about predictability and responsiveness from caregivers.
So if a baby's needs food, comfort, closeness are met consistently.
They develop a fundamental sense of trust. Trust in their caregivers, trust in the world. It forms a secure base.
And if care is inconsistent, neglectful.
Then mistrust develops. A sense of anxiety, uncertainty about whether the world is a safe place, whether people can be relied upon. Successfully navigating this, Erikson said, gives rise to hope.
Then comes toddlerhood. 18 months to maybe 3 years. Autonomy versus shame and doubt. The me-do-it stage.
Totally. They're starting to assert independence, test boundaries, develop new skills like walking, talking, feeding themselves.
And if parents encourage that, let them try, even if they make a mess.
They build autonomy, a sense of, I can do things for myself. But if they're constantly criticized, overly controlled, restricted...
Then they feel shame, doubt their own ability.
Exactly. Shame and doubt creep in. The virtue here, if it goes well, is developing a sense of will, of determination.
Next up, the preschool years, maybe 3 to 5. Initiative versus guilt.
Yeah, this is the age of imagination, play, asking why. Constantly. They want to explore, plan little games, take the lead.
So encouraging that curiosity, letting them initiate activities.
Fosters initiative, a sense of purpose, feeling okay about trying new things and setting goals. But if their attempts are shut down, if they're made to feel like their questions are annoying or their play is silly...
Guilt takes over.
Right. They might become hesitant, afraid to step out. The goal is to emerge with a sense of purpose.
Then school age, say 5 to 12, industry versus inferiority, suddenly peers matter a lot more.
Oh, hugely. School's a big arena for comparison. Kids are constantly seeing how they measure up academically, socially, in sports.
So support from teachers, parents, helping them build skills and feel competent.
Leads to a sense of industry, feeling capable, productive, able to master tasks. But repeated failures, lack of support, feeling like you just can't keep up.
Leads to feelings of inferiority.
Yeah, a pervasive sense of inadequacy. The virtue here is competence.
And then bang, adolescence. 13 to 18, roughly, the big one. Identity versus role confusion.
This feels like where everything comes together, doesn't it? All those earlier stages, plus puberty, cognitive changes, social pressures.
Who am I? What do I believe? Where am I going?
Exactly those questions. Adolescents are trying on different roles, exploring values, thinking about careers, relationships. Ideally, this exploration leads to forming a coherent sense of self and identity.
But if they can't explore, or the choices feel overwhelming.
That's role confusion, uncertainty about who they are, where they fit. Peer groups become incredibly important for belonging and feedback during this time. Erickson called it a psychosocial moratorium.
A timeout to figure things out.
Kind of, yeah. A space to experiment with identities before locking into adult commitments.
And biologically, the brain is still under construction during this time, isn't it?
Massively. The prefrontal cortex, your planning, judgment, impulse control center, isn't fully mature until the early, maybe even mid-20s.
Which might explain some questionable teenage decisions.
It certainly contributes. Better judgment and long-term thinking skills are still developing. At the same time, the limbic system, the emotional center, is highly active.
Add hormones into that mix.
And you've got a potent combination. Puberty brings surges in estrogen and testosterone, driving physical changes, but also affecting mood, risk-taking, social dynamics.
You mentioned links between early puberty and maybe some negative outcomes.
Yeah, research suggests boys who mature early might be slightly more prone to delinquency, substance use. For girls, it's complex, maybe some social awkwardness, being teased, feeling out of step, but outcomes vary a lot.
And their thinking is changing too.
Yeah.
Piaget's cognitive stages.
Right. They're moving beyond concrete thinking. Infancy had sensory-motor learning, object permanence. Early childhood was pre-operational symbolic thought, but still egocentric.
Can't see others' perspectives easily.
Exactly. Then concrete operational in middle childhood logical thought about concrete things, understanding conservation.
Like the water poured into a different glass
Right.
is still the same amount.
Right. And then adolescence brings formal operational thought, abstract reasoning, hypothetical thinking, thinking about justice, morality in more complex ways.
Which connects to Kohlberg's ideas about moral reasoning development. The levels. Pre-conventional, conventional, post-conventional.
Yeah, basically moving from self-interest and avoiding punishment, pre-conventional, to following rules and maintaining social order, conventional, and potentially reaching post-conventional reasoning based on abstract ethical principles.
Something that feels really powerful in adolescence is social comparison. Looking at what peers are doing, achieving.
It's huge. And it can cut both ways, can it?
How so?
Seeing someone else succeed can motivate you. If they can do it, maybe I can. But it can also crush your self-esteem.
Wow.
I'm nowhere near as good as them. I must be stupid.
And that can spiral. Negative thoughts, less effort, confirms the negative thoughts.
It can become a real cycle. Sometimes kids even bond over shared struggles, which paradoxically might make them less motivated to break out of it. This all ties into self-esteem, your overall sense of worth and self-efficacy, your belief you can succeed at specific things.
And media influence has to be mentioned here, idealized images.
Absolutely. Constant exposure to often narrow and unrealistic standards of attractiveness or achievement can really impact self-perception and body image, especially during adolescence.
And looping back to early childhood for a second, attachment styles. Secure, insecure. How much do those early bonds matter later on?
They matter a great deal. Attachment theory suggests that early bond with a primary caregiver creates an internal working model for relationships.
A template?
Kind of, yeah. Secure attachment, built on consistent, sensitive caregiving, tends to lead to better social skills, better emotional regulation, more positive self-view later on.
And insecure styles?
Yeah.
Ambivalent, avoidant, disorganized.
They often stem from less predictable or sensitive caregiving and can lead to difficulties in relationships, managing emotions, trusting others down the line. The caregiver sensitivity seems really key.
Okay, let's shift focus slightly to something tougher. Early stress and trauma. It seems the thinking has moved beyond just diagnosing disorders.
Yes, developmental psychopathology is looking more at the context, understanding how challenging early environments, the social and biological circumstances, can disrupt development and lead to maladaptive responses. It's about how coping abilities get derailed.
And early stress itself can prevent kids from developing those coping skills in the first place.
Definitely. Chronic or severe stress can interfere with the development of brain systems crucial for self-regulation, emotional control, and learning. Think about abuse. It often involves unpredictable, scary signals from the very people who are supposed to provide safety.
How did that affect learning about the world?
It makes it incredibly hard to learn who to trust, how to read social cues accurately, how to manage your own fear and anxiety.
You mentioned specific brain areas earlier, basal ganglia, orbitofrontal cortex. How does stress impact them?
Well, the basal ganglia are involved in reward learning, motivation. The orbitofrontal cortex helps with decision-making, emotional regulation. Severe early stress can alter the neurochemistry in these areas.
Making it harder to learn from positive experiences or control impulses.
Potentially, yes. Studies have shown links between early adversity and changes like reduced activity in reward circuits or even smaller volume in the orbitofrontal cortex.
And the HPA axis, the body's main stress response system.
The hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, yeah. Toxic stress, especially early on, can dysregulate it. It might become overactive or paradoxically blunted. Either way, it impairs the ability to handle future stress effectively.
And risk builds up over time, like a shaky foundation.
That's a great analogy. Early difficulties make it harder to build later skills. One challenge leads to another, increasing the overall risk for mental health problems.
This ties into biological embedding, right? Experiences getting under the skin.
Exactly. Social experiences, positive or negative, can literally change our biology through epigenetics, altering gene expression, changes to the neuroendocrine system like the HPA axis, and even how our brains process social cues.
The ACE's study Adverse Childhood Experiences really highlighted this.
Right.
What kind of caregiver factors increase the risk for ACEs?
Things like instability in the home, witnessing or experiencing violence, caregiver substance abuse or mental illness, like severe depression, low self-esteem in the caregiver. These can all create environments where ACEs are more likely.
And trauma's impact can be really physical, even sensory.
Yes, absolutely. Some kids who've experienced trauma and also kids with autism or high sensory needs can become hypersensitive. Touch, loud sounds, even rocking that's meant to be soothing might feel overwhelming or threatening.
What about the long-term psychological effects?
It can lead to a chronic feeling of being unsafe, on edge, difficulty trusting people, forming stable relationships. Sleep problems are very common too.
And specific trauma symptoms. Flashbacks, avoidance.
Right. Intrusive memories, nightmares, actively avoiding reminders of the trauma, hypervigilance, always scanning for danger, being easily startled, having strong reactions to triggers.
And it can really mess with your self-perception too.
Definitely. Feelings of shame, guilt, worthlessness are common, and a narrowed window of tolerance, finding it hard to cope with strong emotions, either shutting down or becoming overwhelmed easily.
It's vital to remember these aren't signs of weakness, though. They're survival responses.
Absolutely critical point. These are understandable reactions to overwhelming experiences. Respecting coping styles, even difficult ones like self-harm.
Which is often about managing unbearable internal states.
Yes, trying to cope with extreme distress or dissociation, normalizing these reactions, using grounding techniques for flashbacks, and seeking trauma-informed support is key. Trauma significantly raises the risk for PTSD, anxiety, depression, substance use, personality disorders.
It casts a long shadow.
It really can. Getting the right help is crucial.
Okay, back to adolescence specifically. You mentioned increased rates of anxiety and depression.
Yes, a noticeable jump during these years, and often higher rates reported in girls than boys. And tragically, suicide becomes a leading cause of death, which really highlights the severity.
And interpersonal factors play a big role. Family conflict, social issues.
Very much so. Things like ongoing family adversity, poor ways of handling conflict, needing constant reassurance, or getting caught in cycles of co-rumination.
Where friends just endlessly rehash problems.
Yeah, without finding solutions. It can maintain anxiety and depression. And maybe more so for girls, if their goals are heavily focused on social connection and approval, relationship problems hit harder.
We talk Erickson's identity stage.
Well, yeah.
Marcia refined that. 4 statuses.
Right. James Marcia looked at exploration, or crisis, and commitment, leads to 4 possibilities. Diffusion, no exploration, no commitment. Foreclosure, Commitment without exploring, maybe just taking on parents' values. Moratorium, actively exploring, struggling, not committed yet. And achievement, explored and made commitment.
So moratorium is that timeout period.
Exactly, a necessary struggle for many.
Right.
And this whole process can be extra complex for, say, multiracial youth navigating different aspects of their heritage, but ultimately can lead to really strong integrated identities with support.
Okay, nearly there. Let's pull together self-concept, self-esteem, self-efficacy.
Right. Self-concept is multifaceted. We're social actors playing roles. We're motivated agents with goals. We're autobiographical authors telling our life story.
And the self reflects on itself. The I observes the me.
Exactly. Self-esteem is that overall feeling of worth, often tied to success and things we value. Self-efficacy is more specific belief in your ability to do this particular task.
And they aren't the same thing. You could have low self-esteem but high self-efficacy in one area.
Totally. Think of a brilliant surgeon who feels generally worthless but knows they can nail a complex operation, or a perfectionist with high standards, maybe high efficacy, but low self-esteem because they never feel good enough.
And autonomy is key here too. Feeling like you have a choice.
Hugely important. Self-determination theory highlights autonomy, competence, and relatedness, feeling connected, as basic psychological needs. Meeting these fosters well-being and performance.
Better than being motivated by rewards or punishment.
Much better. Autonomous motivation, doing something because you want to, value it, or find it interesting, leads to more sustained effort and better outcomes than controlled motivation, which feels pressured.
Let's touch briefly on parenting again. It's a two-way street,
It's
Rem.
absolutely bidirectional. Kids influence parents just as parents influence kids. A child's temperament shapes how parents respond.
And what influences parents?
So many things. Parents' own personality, agreeable, conscientious parents tend to be warmer, provide more structure. Less anxious parents support autonomy more. Their age, mental health, beliefs. But also the child's traits and the whole sociocultural context.
Even parents' phone use can affect things. Technoference.
Yeah, it's a real thing. Those little interruptions, looking at a phone during interactions. It sends subtle messages of distraction. It can impact connection, sensitivity, even how parents co-parent.
And just to recap the parenting links to Erickson's stages quickly.
Responsive care builds trust in infancy. Encouraging independence fosters autonomy in toddlers. Supporting exploration builds initiative in preschoolers. Providing feedback builds industry in school-age kids. And supporting exploration helps identity formation in teens.
Got it. Finally, a quick word on how we know all this. Research methods.
Right. We use experiments for cause-effect, but maybe less real-world. Quasi-experiments, when you can't manipulate everything. Correlational studies, looking at relationships, not cause.
And designs that track development over time.
Yep. Longitudinal studies follow the same people for years. Great for seeing individual change, but people drop out, and cohort effects are an issue.
Cohort effects, meaning people born at the same time share unique experiences.
Exactly. Cross-sectional studies look at different ages at one time quicker, but cohort effects are a big problem. Sequential designs try to combine both complex, but often give the richest data.
And quantitative genetics. Twin and adoption studies again.
Yes, using relatedness to estimate heritability. But always remember, those heritability numbers are estimates. They apply to populations, not individuals, and they don't capture the full complexity. Both genes and environment are 100% essential. Genetics gets a vote, not a veto.
So, wrapping this all up, the big picture is this constant dynamic dance between your genes and your environment. They're always shaping who you are.
Absolutely. Your abilities, personality, how you feel day to day, it's all emerging from that interplay.
And we hit on some surprising things, that mitochondrial DNA from your mom, the hints of Lamarckian-like effects, the 0% heritability for finger number.
Right. And just the sheer power of early experiences, how profoundly nurture shapes our biological pathways.
So maybe a final thought for you listening. How does understanding this intricate nature-nurture interaction change how you think about your own development maybe, or society, or just your own life story?
Yeah, what aspects of yourself do you see maybe through a slightly different lens now? It's definitely worth mulling over.
We hope this deep dive gave you some food for thought. Thanks for joining us.